Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Council briefing of the 13th of September 2022. I declare the meeting open at 6 p.m. and acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past and present. Apologies, members on approved leave of absence. We do have Councillor Ashley Wallace on leave from the 27th to the 18th of September. So I believe he'll be joining us at the council meeting next Tuesday. And Councillor Warner has advised that she no longer requires the approved leave of absence for the period of the 7th to the 24th of September and is in attendance this evening. Councillor Iopolo is attending via Zoom and everyone else is in the chamber. Without anything further, we'll go straight to public question time and receiving public statements. Welcome members of the public. No set order to come forward, but we do have someone very keen who's already approaching the microphone, claiming his prize position.
Well, I did come early.
Before you start, I'd just like to say that we just ask that you state your name, suburb in which you reside, others haven't, and that you speak for up to 3 minutes. Okay. Thank you very much.
My name is Caligera Caffarelli, regularly known as Colin, 166 Chelmsford Road, North Perth. I've got an application for a planning application. I've just brought some photos to show regarding the application where photos of the existing house where the mezzanine, even though it looks 3 stories, but it's a mezzanine floor with a second floor on top. All the boundaries, because I've subdivided the block. The block is where on the application stated it had to be 1,500 off the boundary, but from the boundary to the existing house, if you look at the surveyor's plan, is 2 meters 250, so it meets all those codes. I've just brought pictures of the house of where the first floor would go regarding to the existing house, where the existing house roof plate is 4.5 meters off the ground to start with. So basically, I've written something on the back of each plan and of each photo, and then there's a picture of 13 Blake Street that you've already allowed to go ahead with a 3-story building. So I've got a picture of that and showing that, and I'm just want to leave it to you guys. So when you have a look at the application, you can have a look at the photos and everything's written on the back of these. Is that okay? All right. Who do I leave these?
Thank you.
No, thank you. Not even different. Okay, no, thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name's Melissa Ledger. And I'd like to make a statement against agenda items 5.3 and 5.4. Not only am I a resident in the City of Vincent, I'm also a public health professional and work in the area of cancer prevention. So I have a particular interest in the briefing, to address the briefing tonight in respect to the Shisha Bar and the Shisha Lounge on Beaufort Street. The 2 applications, as I mentioned, on the agenda items are 221 Beaufort Street, Perth, and 624 Beaufort Street, Mount Lawley. I support the officer recommendations that council refuse the applications for change of use to unlimited use Shisha Bar or Shisha Lounge. I am concerned about the proposals due to the significant health risks of Shisha smoking, which are often unknown or not fully appreciated, both on the individual smoking the Shisha and on bystanders exposed to the secondhand smoke, as their impacts and health effects are very similar to tobacco smoking, as they do use tobacco. The proposals risk renormalising tobacco use, are detrimental to the character and amenity of the area, have a detrimental social impact and impact on the community, and undermine the intent of state and local government policy and plans in respect of smoking and tobacco use. I wish to support refusal on the following planning grounds, consistent with the reasons given by the officer in the council briefing agenda: that the proposals would detrimentally impact on the amenity of the surrounding area by the drift of toxic emissions from Shisha smoking, posing a significant health risk. In this regard, water pipe or Shisha smoking emissions can cause non-smokers harm in the same way that secondhand cigarette smoking does. There's no safe level of exposure to secondhand smoke, as all exposure carries risk. And I agree with the officer reports, which states that the applicants have not demonstrated the risk of emissions could be appropriately mitigated. As the applicants have not demonstrated that the emissions associated could be mitigated, the proposals would be detrimental to the amenity of the adjoining properties. The consideration of matters set out in the clause 67(2) of Schedule 2 of the Planning and Development Local Planning Schemes. Do I need to say all of that? Also support not approving the applications due to undue amenity impact that would not be compatible with their setting, and that they would be inconsistent with the objectives and approach of the city's draft local planning policy, restricted premises smoking. So for the above reasons, I respectively urge City of Vincent to exercise its discretionary power to refuse the applications. And just on a final note, as a public health professional, I also wish to state that I support the intent of the proposed local planning policy, restricted premises smoking, to embed public health principles in planning processes and decision-making in alignment with the City of Vincent's Public Health Plan 2020 to 25. It's an important step in reducing the supply and use of tobacco and tobacco-related products that will in turn support the creation of smoke-free environments. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mayor Emma, Cole and councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to attend the briefing. My name is Teresa Bangioni. I own the neighbouring property on the eastern side of 107 Summers Street that has a proposal in for a 6-group dwelling. And also the northern side, I own 36 Sheraton Street, which is directly behind. I just have 3 objections. The height of the building, I find it very excessive. The units are large and extreme. They do not match the density of the other properties in Summers Street. If they were reduced, the amount of units, the level could be lower and therefore the shadowing effect won't be so bad. I have a picture of shadows, but I can hand it in, and that is in the middle of the day on existing property, and going 1 level higher than that would it would be in darkness for all afternoons. That's one photo. Also, there's no overshadowing diagram for my property. There's only one at the back on the northern side, and the sun goes down in the west. So I don't know why an overshadowing plan wasn't put in for the eastern side. And the explanation in the report is that it's commercial property and it doesn't need any the R codes don't need to be met, but it's a childcare centre and it has little children. They need sunlight, they need airflow. And I feel that building 4 levels will take away from all that, the airflow building, and also there's a privacy issue. Also, they justify the height in the report by saying there's 6 and 8 level unit blocks, but they're on Lord Street facing a tennis court and a busy intersection. There's no 6 and 8 level blocks on Summer Street. Next door is 3 levels, and I find that suffice. Privacy is my second issue. New amended plans have been lodged to accommodate the western side, but not the eastern side, and also not the back at 36 Sheraton. There's a small courtyard in the childcare centre and an outdoor play area, which will be in darkness once these get built. Also, my property at 36 Sheraton Street has a small courtyard at the back where the employees have their lunch, and it's recreational area that also will be in darkness, and also have extreme privacy issues because they have not allowed for any privacy screening on my side, on the eastern side or the northern side. So I also have diagrams of that, and no matter how many trees I plant, I cannot stop 4 levels looking into my property. And the visitors bay, 1 visitors bay is not suffice for me. There's 6 units with 3 bedrooms plus study, so there could be 4 bedrooms, and I guarantee there'll be more than 1 visitor at any one time at these units. And they're using Claysbrook and Sheraton as saying they can use the bays there, but those bays are already full. So and it boasts a 6.3 star rating, but it's taking away my sunlight and my airflow, and also privacy issues. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I appreciate you coming in.
Can I have this?
Yes, Virginia's there.
Thank you. I've got it all together. I just had to show you one talking there. It's all right. So I have this. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Mayor Cole, councillors and staff. My name is Peter Merger and I'm from Urban Town Planning. I'm the applicant for item 5.1 on the agenda for the proposed six-unit, four-story development at 109 Summer Street in Perth. The site itself is currently a duplex lot comprising two single houses, which will be demolished for this development. Each house is a separate vehicular driveway from Summer Street, which the proposed development will consolidate into one access point for the group dwellings. The property is zoned residential R80, which allows for buildings to be constructed up to 4 stories in height. And in the immediate locality, there are also a mix of other zonings, including residential R100 properties directly to the rear of the site and along Lord Street properties that are zoned commercial. The mix of these different zonings have contributed to the eclectic built form and land use outcomes of the area, which inform the context and character of this precinct of the City of Vincent. That's why you see in this area a range of multiple dwellings, offices, group dwellings, character homes, all sort of side by side. Additionally, there is a childcare centre next door to the property at 103 Summer Street, and there are a range of other amenities and within walking distance of the site, including HBF Stadium, Lotus Park. There's also the East Perth train station, various parks, local bars and restaurants. So it is, in my view, an ideal place for density and the type of development that we are seeking approval for by council. The recommendation before council is for approval, and the officer report provides a detailed analysis of the process that we have completed to get here. The application was initially lodged in November of last year and has undergone 4 design review panel meetings, 3 sets of advertising, 2 different planning officers and several requests for further information. In short, we've worked really hard to get the support from the city and to present council with a far improved development compared to the one which was first submitted last year. With respect to the development itself, the units are each 4 stories in height, with living areas, bedrooms and studies located across each level, and parking for 2 vehicles, which is accessed from the primary street. Because of the 4 levels, the design is somewhat flexible. The ground floor area is able to be converted and used as a bedroom, as a playroom or as an office. This makes the development perfect for a wide range of people, including families with children, professionals, downsizers, or those who are carers of elderly parents. The development provides excellent balcony views to the city, lots of landscaping and the planting of new trees, and is designed using modern features as well as materials such as red bricks that are compatible with the broader locality. 1 visitor parking bay is provided in lieu of 2. However, we have minimised vehicle access and have 1 proposed driveway instead of 2, which is currently existing. This allows the city the additional space on the road, which you can use for motorcycle parking or additional street parking. Our additional proposal did contemplate having 2 visitor parking bays to comply with the visitor parking requirement. However, that took away from this development and the streetscape, and it provided too much hard standing in that front setback area. So what we've done, given that we are providing additional space on the street, we've now been able to incorporate more landscaping within that front setback area. Each dwelling still has 2 car
You've
bays.
reached 3 minutes, so if you could just make your final statement, your final sentence, please.
Okay, I'll finish up then. I hope the council receives the application positively and appreciates the work that we have put in to achieve an improved and well-considered design. I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Peter, I was interested to know, have you been engaging with the neighbours, in particular the childcare centre?
Not particularly, no. This is the first time that I've heard the concerns. I have through, I guess, the officer. We've been through several sets of advertising, and I knew that there was some issues from the western neighbour mostly, which we try to address through some design changes. There were some comments there made about visual privacy, and I guess one of the things that we took into consideration with respect to the childcare centre was, providing ample setbacks, having the driveway along that side. So we did have some, I guess, some separation between our development and the childcare centre. Because it is commercial, we don't actually have any requirements with respect to visual privacy. We can come closer. We've chosen not to do that. We've tried to landscape the balconies and provide that separation. So if there's anything else that I guess he suggested, we'd be happy to take it on board if we can do that. Yeah, it's we have sort of liaised with the officer.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
Thanks.
Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Gidai Hailu. I've got an application here. 221 Bedford Street, Shisha Bar. Change of use to Shisha Bar. Yeah, is not as bad as the lady that she was talking before. It's shisha is, I just moved from Melbourne to here. Shisha is not like in Melbourne, it's legal indoor. In here, when I moved here to WA, I got told it's outdoor and you have to have a patio to sell shisha. So it's been a year just paying bills and rent. I've done everything what the council asked me to do. I provided everything they asked me to provide. And it's only going to be 20 patrons in the back of the patio. And I've got 4 fans placed in the patio to blow the smokes, and it won't affect the neighbors, you know. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just here to ask you to give us a chance. It's been over a year. We're just paying rent, bills, you know, and we're only gonna have 20 people, and it won't be noisy. Yeah. And when the tobacco department says you can have shisha here in WA outdoor, it just needs to be outdoor, where 50% needs to be open, you know. Yeah, and we got everything the officers, the planning department asked me to do. We got everything provided, yeah. So I'm just here to ask you guys to give us a chance, because it's been over a year now. We're just paying rent and bills, you know. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming down and putting your case forward. Thank you very much. Any further speakers?
Hi, my name is Sammy Burr. G'day, Halo's business partner. I was a 5-4 worker, as a driller, the mine site for 5-6 years. I've gave up drilling towards last December, and so joined G'day in the business opening the shisha bar. So since the start of the year, all we've been doing is just paying rent, bills, and all we want is just a chance. And we provided everything the council asked, and so we just need chance pretty much. So the shisha bar we've got a patio built in, we built it up, we got the approval for it, but it was a smoking area. It wasn't mentioned as a shisha bar, so we got told to do change of use. So I don't know what's the difference between shisha and tobacco. Like, they're pretty much the same. If tobacco, cigarettes, even worse. But now, just since last year, July, we've just been paying rent, like just trying to get up and running pretty much. And it hasn't been easy journey till now. It's just been like mentally, been draining, financially, pretty much put everything we have on it. So it's like, I don't see how it's fair, just us being stuck for like a year without income, without anything. So we just need to have like a go. So we just need the City of Vincent's support pretty much to just get us up and running, get us the approval. And yeah, we put everything on it, all our savings, and even mentally at the moment, it just hasn't been easy for us. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Appreciate you coming forward with those thoughts and letting us know of your situation. Appreciate that. Are there any further speakers this evening?
A bit closer, yes. Better? Thank you. So I am the owner of the property next door to the proposed business.
Just before you get started, just over here, over this way.
Oh, sorry.
Hello.
Sorry, I'm directing it
Yes,
to you.
if you
Sorry.
could just state your name.
My name is Frances Hopkins.
Yep. Of
And
Mount.
I'm a proprietor of 225 Burford Street and have been for over 40 years.
Thank you very much. Go ahead with your statement.
Yes, all right, then. Thank you. and have people coming from all over Australia and the world to stay, and it is operating in a quiet venue, as guests usually are from zones and are like to have a good night's rest. The area that's proposed for entertainment, the backyard, is not compatible to the residential area in terms of scale and distance from neighbours less than 5 metres away from the toilet block, is close to and 10 feet from the adjacent residential bedrooms in my property, which is totally not acceptable. There is only a small fence with plastic blinds dividing the property, which is totally inadequate. The noise factor and the air pollution factor is totally inappropriate for guests in their bedrooms. It will mean that in the summer months, tenants, because we're a heritage building, the tenants will not be able to open their windows, and even with the windows shut, they will not be able to avoid the noise of 20 people talking and smoking in the entertainment area. Our clientele include travellers, retired people from the country areas who have medical appointments from St Charles Garden. I've had them for years, and travellers who want to have a good night's sleep after air flights and coming long distances. The property is totally unsuitable as a night entertainment venue, as it is wedged in a total residential that should not be subjected to noise and pollution under any circumstances.
Thank you, Frances.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Are there any further speakers this evening? Okay, well, I'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for coming to the council meeting tonight and sharing your views with the council. Some of you have raised questions, and then we can ask those when we come to this item of administration. So thank you very much. Also just noting that we have received some questions in writing from residents. We have heard from Ms. Yoko Kashihara on item 5.3, who's put in some questions which we can come to on that item, and Virendra Budaluri of North Perth on item 5.2. And Frances, we also received your statement in writing, but it was good to see you in person this evening as well. Okay, so we'll close public question time and move to declarations of interest.
Through Mayor Cole, I haven't received any declarations for tonight's agenda.
Councillors, any last minute declarations?
Sorry, Mayor Cole, the agenda, the item that was deferred from last month's agenda from Councillor Ipolo, the financial interest in relation to item 11.1, which is the claims for reimbursement for legal costs.
Yes, and I understand, Councillor Ipolo, that you're not seeking to participate or to vote on that matter. Yes, thank you.
Right.
Any other declarations of interest, councillors? Okay, thank you. So the way that we deal with matters in terms of council members asking questions of administration, this is a forum for question and answer. The decision making happens at the council meeting next Tuesday, and you're welcome to attend that meeting. But we do deal with the items that have been raised by members of the public gallery first, and in the order that they were raised. So the first item raised this evening was number 5.2, 166 Chelmsford Road, North Perth, proposed alterations and additions to a single house. Councillors, are there questions in relation to this item? Councillor Loden.
Just in terms of the question asked from the gallery, I didn't entirely capture the full extent of the query there, but one of them was to do with the rear setbacks and an indication that it was larger than what was advised in the plan. So, I mean, maybe for the benefit of the applicant, if we could provide a response on that. And he also raised a query about it being a 3-storey development, and that there are a number of others in the area. And so why were they acceptable, but this was not? And I think there might have been others, but I didn't catch those.
Through you, Nicole, I'll start with the building height, if you like. So in terms of the established precedents within the street and the surrounding area, the immediate streetscape is generally what we would assess consistency with in terms of consistency of built form in the streetscape. So in terms of Chelmsford Road itself, it's really dominated by single-story developments where upper floors are provided. They're generally set back behind that ground floor, so they're presenting as single-story. There is a few examples of two-story developments with balconies or upper floors sitting generally in line with the ground floor. In terms of that third story element, there's no examples in the immediate streetscape. And we've also conducted analysis of surrounding streets, including Leake Street to the west of the site, which again is a pretty similar development pattern. Having a look at the justification submitted by the applicant, the three-story developments proposed are in the North Perth area, but not in the immediate vicinity of the subject site. While the area is a two-story area, we can consider 3 stories, but it generally depends on how they are designed to mitigate impacts of building bulk. And that's generally through setbacks from the street and from the lot boundaries, and is also on a contextual basis. So those particular examples were considered on their own merits and their own context as well. In terms of the rear setbacks, I can confirm what the correct rear setback to number 166A Chelmsford Street is in the briefing notes, but I can confirm that it did meet the deemed to comply standards for setbacks to that rear boundary.
Councillors. Hello, coordinator. Yes, welcome, Carson, to the role. I just wanted to check in. I know it says in the report that the applicant has opted not to, either doesn't have email or has not provided and hasn't responded to a written request, didn't receive the consultation outcomes. Has there been an offer from administration to the applicant and their designer to meet and to, address some of these concerns and to try to talk about what potential changes could be made to make this be approvable?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes. We have sent a number of requests for further information, including offers, as always, to work with applicants, as well as our design review panel is also of great assistance. And in this instance, we were unavailable to schedule that meeting or work with the applicant to work through and find solutions.
Okay. Is there any way to seek, again, given that this has come to council with a recommendation for refusal and there are significant areas where it falls outside of the built form policy requirements, could the administration perhaps try again to see whether there is a willingness to see whether there could be changes made to the development that would be responsive to community feedback and to the planning framework and to the streetscape that this is existing within?
Yes, certainly. We would be more than happy to touch base again with the applicant and work through that hopefully over the next week. If not, we'll see what we can do.
And just to ensure that they've had the report and that they can read through that and see that there's quite significant issues raised on various aspects of the proposal.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Into that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Any further questions? I think that the Mr. Caffarelli was referring to 13 Blake Street. So if we could just have some information about that as well, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I can include that in the briefing notes.
Okay. Unless there are further questions on this one, we'll then move on. The next item raised was 5.3, and that is number 221 Beaufort Street, Perth, change of use from eating house to restaurant cafe and unlisted use shisha bar, including alterations and additions, which is the signage. Any questions on this item, please? Hello, Manager. Welcome back. I just wanted to go to the issue of the 1 year. I know that's outlined quite substantially in the report, but I think that we are dealing with, you know, quite substantial issues with people when they've been dealing with rent and making improvements at some financial cost, making clear that this is not something that is a planning consideration. But can we just go back through that history as to why this application has taken 1 year to find its way to council?
Mayor Cole, in the officer report, it captures the background of the application, including the date of the application, which was the 20th of April this year. So that's the time that the application's been lodged with the city. As part of the application assessment process, I trust that it's clear in the report that the land use requires an exercise of discretion. So it's not a clear black and white scenario, and there can't be any certainty given that the proposed land use is appropriate in this location. So there was significant assessment as part of this and working with the proponents in providing additional information. There's also additional commentary in the officer report that sets out additional information that was submitted post-advertising to supplement the information that was already provided. So we've been trying to work with the proponents to give them every opportunity, I suppose, to put forward their best case, accepting that the land use and the development proposal itself requires discretion and it's subjective in terms of its approval. So I completely sympathise with the applicants. I understand that it does feel like a protracted process, but there is work behind the scenes that administration's been trying to work through, balancing between the proponents as well as aggrieved residents in the area.
And just in relation to the patio, that this is a recommendation for refusal. But sorry, that because they're a turn, I've read both. It's getting a little bit mixed up. Which is the one that has already built the patio?
Mayor Cole, that's item 5.4.
Okay, so at 221 Beaufort Street, they haven't yet invested in building the patio.
Mayor Cole, there is an existing patio.
It has been constructed. Was that an authorised, was that the one where delegated under delegated authority? Yes, okay, and I'm
Yes.
on track now because there was a patio that was constructed under delegated authority. At that time, when those plans were submitted, was that structure labelled as smoking? Sorry, the wording of the applicant was a smoking area. It was just a new patio. Was administration aware that the purpose of the patio was primarily to be a patio that would be appropriate for shisha bar?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, we'll have to confirm that in the briefing notes. Ultimately, the premises has an existing approval as a restaurant cafe, or an eating house, the former terminology. So it's not unreasonable to approve a patio associated with that use, irrespective.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to do is like look at the planning aspects, but also look at what were labelled on the plans, what expectations potentially were created at the time that the patio was approved. And just in relation to the report talking about emissions, I know we've had the 9 grams chicken matter, which was quite different, but is there any way for the city to actually be able to measure, and I know that this is not operating as a shisha bar, but in relation to the other item where it has there been any attempt to measure the impact of emissions?
To you, Mayor Cole, that's outside of my area of expertise, but I will liaise with other officers and include some commentary in the briefing notes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this item? Okay, then moving on to item 5.4, 624 Beaufort Street, Mount Lawley, change of use to unlisted use shisha lounge, including alterations and additions, unauthorised existing development. Councillors? No questions? So in this application is that there is a recommendation to approve the construction of a patio, but to not approve the use, which is a use that has been operating on and off with various elements of compliance action having been taken. We did have some questions from a resident in writing today, a nearby resident. Sorry, I just opened that one. There's 3 questions here from Ms. Yoko Kashihara, and I'm just wondering if we could have some responses to those questions in the briefing notes. There is some talk about the comparison in the officer report to McDonald's and the Ellington Jazz Club, and I'm not sure whether that was actually in the applicant's report rather than the officer's report.
To you, Mayor Cole, I might provide some responses now, just to clarify.
Yep.
Those written statements from Ms. Yoko was in relation to the previous item 221 Beaufort Street.
Oh, sorry, my
That's okay.
apologies.
That's okay.
So confusing.
And in regards to those 3 questions, the first question was seeking clarification whether there needed to be specific reference to the clause of the city's planning scheme in regards to the objectives that the city's officers are suggesting that the proposal does not satisfy. So administration will review that and confirm, and so that those reasons for refusal are clear for the council meeting. In regards to the second question from Ms. Yoko, it alluded to some inconsistencies between scheduler submissions and administration's responses to those and the content of the officer report. I agree with that, and there was inaccuracies in that attachment that was erroneous, and we've now uploaded on the city's website replacement pages. So I hope that's clear in terms of the scheduler submissions and administration's responses. And the third question in regards to drawing comparisons to McDonald's and Ellington Jazz Club, that was alluded to in the officer report, but specific to operating hours in terms of establishing the existing amenity of the area. It's not about or the commentary in the officer report was not about its acceptability in terms of amenity impacts. It was more so understanding what are the operating hours of nighttime venues in that area. So that's where the comparison was being drawn.
Thank you. And I think that item 1 is relevant to this item because there is quite a lot of reporting which is very similar across both of the items. The other thing I just thought I'd flesh out just because, it's the sort of questions that can come up is how, our new draft local planning policy, which is currently being advertised, and there's a lot of discussion in the report about, that effectively can be given due consideration. If someone was to say, what's the difference between a shisha bar versus, say, the Queen's that's still no longer has a smoking area, but if it did, like, say if we take the Queen's out of this because they no longer do, which is, if there's a smoking area, say at the Beaufort, and someone said to the City of Vincent, what's the difference between an unlisted use shisha bar, which is going to, if the policy finds its way forward, will be given a use which would be restricted premises smoking. What is the difference between that use and having a smoking area within an existing bar or tavern?
To you, Mayor Cole, it comes down to primarily the function of that venue. And it also relates to the license type. So if you have some sort of tavern, or if you have a tavern, for example, there's a liquor license and that permits you to have a dedicated smokers area that is subservient or subordinate to the primary function of a tavern in the service of alcohol. Very different to what is an unlisted use, which is a venue primarily to smoke shisha in this instance. So I think that's the key difference, that as a decision maker, you would need to be satisfied that primary function of smoking is appropriate in that location. So I think that's the key difference.
Sorry, I appreciate that you'd like to engage, but now that we've had public question time, yeah. Look, I'm sorry, but we can talk to you during the week, and you're welcome to come back and speak at public question time next Tuesday. But for now, we are now in our session between council administration, and you're very welcome to watch. And yes, no, I know you've not been before, and I appreciate this is a new experience. I'm very happy to, help guide you through this. Thank you. All right, so in relation to the policy, also the time frame on the policy, was looking at that coming back early in the new year, but the consultation is closing in October, I believe.
You may call the 24th of October.
Yep, okay. All right. Are there any further questions on this item? Councillor Uplow?
Thank you, Mayor. This is more a clarity from administration. When an application or recommendation is refused for change of use, but approved in relation to, say, a patio, is there any mechanism in the planning guidelines that says that because if more of what is considered material, i.e. change of use, is being denied, that the whole application needs to be denied? Or is it possible that a less material item can be approved, but the more material item be knocked back?
Through you, Mayor Cole, under the planning regulations, it is possible to approve parts of an application and refuse parts of an application. It's not about substantively what is being sought. So you can do part approvals irrespective of, in this instance, for example, we're recommending approval of a works component and refusal of the substantive like land use component, as well as a front fence and gate.
Sorry, the only other thing I'd add to that is one of the principles set out under the planning framework is that if an approval is in effect a refusal, so if we've if council refuses the use but approves the works associated with then delivering that use, in effect that's a refusal anyway, because they wouldn't go ahead with the works given that the use wasn't approved. So it's possible. We just need to be clear on that nuance. So if the applicant still wants to proceed with the works, if the use isn't approved, then that's fine. But if they would only proceed with the works if the use was approved, then an approval of those works wouldn't be appropriate.
Thanks for the clarification. So just a follow up to clarify, administration is therefore saying in this example that denial of change of use is not considered to be an effectively deemed to be a refusal.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I understand that question correctly, yes, refusal of the land use relates specifically to that land use component and front fence works, but does not extend to a patio, which could reasonably be sought because it relates to otherwise the function of that venue. So it's possible to have clear refusals and approvals in the same decision.
Okay, thanks.
Manager, has there been any discussion with the applicant about alternative uses?
To you, Mayor Cole, as I understand it, no, the applicant's seeking a very specific use. That could be a separate conversation, but as I understand it, that is what they're seeking approval for. And it's through the officer report, I trust it's clear that it's one of those uses where it's fundamental about the land use, because inherently it will result in emissions of smoke. So there's only so much that the applicant can do in terms of modifying the proposal. And they made some modifications post-advertising, but ultimately it's fundamentally about the acceptability of that land use and the nature of that land use.
Okay. And in terms of the noise complaints, because we have actually had an experience of this operating, they wanted to do further works to ameliorate that. But is that the noise issue by approving a patio? I'm assuming that would then depend on the amount of people, etc., that were to use that. But I'm sorry, I'm sort of going around in circles a bit here tonight, but I just guessed, but that my final request on this one is, if we do approve a patio, can it be stipulated that this is not to be used as a smoking area for the purposes of a unlisted shisha bar, to avoid a situation that has potentially happened in the former item?
You, Mayor Cole, let us review the recommendation wording.
Thank you. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Possibly similar questions. I'm just trying to understand the current situation or the history. And apologies if I've missed it in the report. Is there a current use that has been approved for this location?
To you, Mayor Cole, through you, Mayor Cole, sorry. Existing land use is a shop, although that is not currently tenanted. So it's been vacant to the front portion of that property. We're talking about item 5.4. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused between the two, but the front portion of that building previously was used as a shop, currently not tenanted. The applicant is seeking approval for shisha lounge to the rear of that premises.
So the rear of the premises doesn't have any approved use in place?
Through you, Mayor Cole, my suggestion is that entire property historically is probably used as a shop. It's probably associated with the functioning of the shop in the front portion.
Okay, and so if this is passed as a recommended by administration to refuse the application but approve the patio, that I suppose it's a question of what does that practically mean for the applicant. As the director pointed out, maybe it means they won't go ahead because they can't fulfill their original desire. I'm just concerned that with the patio approval, where does that leave us with noise, the noise complaints that have been received in the past? And I have a question about the final point of the history that states that after April 2022, the business wasn't operating, but the business operators were still occupying the premises in the evenings, and how that is dealt with by council if there are ongoing noise complaints or there's no business operating, but there is still some of the concerns to amenity.
Through you, Mayor Cole, there is a separate function around enforcement and compliance. So ultimately, if there is no approval granted for the use, then if any unauthorised land use was occurring, then we have an enforcement policy and the city's officers would undertake enforcement action as appropriate.
So if there was or if the only approval in place was the shop and there was people using the premises in the evenings and at unacceptable noise levels, that would just be dealt with through compliance or through police matters. Is that how you would approach that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, so there's a lot of uses that could operate there without approval because they're exempt. And yes, so if there was a noise complaint or noise issues as a result of the operation of that establishment for whatever use it was occurring, then yeah, health would assess it against the noise regulations. Compliance would do an assessment at the same time to ensure they were, operating in accordance with the exemptions that exist. And then we go through the normal noise assessment process.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to find the section in this report on noise because there have been verified noise complaints, but I can't see what works are proposed. What forms part of the application to deal with the noise issues in terms of having an acoustic report or dealing with the fact that despite whether this is whatever use this is, there seems to be a noise issue that's been verified through complaint and testing.
Mayor Cole, there was a noise management plan submitted, if we're talking about item 5.4 still.
We're very much talking about 5.4.
There was a noise management plan submitted. It's on page 13 of that item under the header noise.
Yes, I see it now.
Yep. And ultimately they submitted the noise management plan. However, there were some concerns from city's administration in terms of our own investigations and noise readings that we had previously undertaken, and also, I guess, the adequacy of the noise report in addressing noise emissions and that it wouldn't be able to satisfy the applicable noise regulations.
Yeah, okay, so they're saying that their measures are to reduce the music and to quit after 10 p.m, but there's still been ongoing issues experienced. Okay, they're not doing any building works. Yep, okay, great. Thank you for the clarification. Councillor Castle.
Sorry, one more question. Just back to this noise issue again. I just have a question. If we are to approve the patio but refuse the application for change of use, then what types of use would be available to the applicant under the existing approval? It's just so that we're aware what we're potentially approving, and if the applicant decides to change tack, not to seek a change of use, but to open an establishment that complies with their existing approval using the patio, what types of approval or what types of uses would that entail, and what hours would they be able to operate?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think we'll provide a list in the briefing notes of all the uses that would be permissible and would be exempt. And yeah, as I mentioned, in that case, we would go through we'd use the noise regulations to manage any noise impacts rather than using the planning process. We just couldn't use the planning process. We can't use it now either if they, without that structure, attempt to use that space for another use that's exempt under the planning framework.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful. I think it would be useful to know if we're approving part of this application, what the actual consequences of that are, leaving aside the shisha bar use, what that we're not inadvertently approving something that we're not aware of.
That could happen on any day though, really, because it's exempt. So it could become a small bar. They still need to get a liquor license though. So yeah, but it could also be a shop or a cafe or something that didn't have as, significant nighttime activity. Yep. Okay, any further questions? Okay, moving on then to item 5.1, which was, I think, the last item raised this evening. That is in relation to 107 to 109 Summer Street, Perth, proposed six grouped dwellings. Questions, Councillor Loden?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of follow-up queries about the engagement with the DRP chair. There was some comments around landscaping and the cladding, and that those were addressed in the comments by administration. Firstly, on the cladding around the garage door. So if I'm interpreting this correctly, administration is effectively disagreeing with the DRP chair and saying that we should just leave the garage doors as they are. They're comfortable that there's sufficient sort of variable materials used on the site.
Through Mayor Cole, I believe that is correct, but I might just confirm that so it's crystal clear in the briefing notes in regards to what the DRP said and if we have differed for that and the reasons why. That's okay.
Second one is around the landscaping, and I do note there's a little section in there that was pointed out to me by a fellow councillor around review with parks to confirm there was no room for additional verge trees. Otherwise known as
They got ahead of you
Yeah.
there, didn't they, Councillor Loden?
Otherwise known as the Councillor Loden provision. The plans show deep soil zones, and 2 of the 4 trees on the eastern side of the lot have deep soil zones and 2 do not, but they're all coral gums, or at least the ones that are planted are coral gums. So just wondering why the 2 that are not aren't. Just for reference, it's on page 30. The deep soil zones is on page 30, and then the actual landscape plan is on page 34 of the individual report.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll confirm with the Parks team and include that information in the briefing notes.
And then the second one was around the verge trees, despite it saying that I'm still going to ask the question anyway. So lot 107, the driveway basically is removed because it's no longer required. The driveway, the crossover is for 109. So I guess I'd like to understand why a tree can't go in there, given that there is a verge tree already in place in the front of the lot. Part of the justification is that a verge tree planted there would interact with the tree that's proposed in the site. However, if you look at those same plans on page 34, there's a tree planted right next to the existing verge tree in the site. So if it's okay for it to be that close there, then why not 4 meters up the road?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we did interrogate this with our Parks team already. And I had a very similar question for them. Ultimately, that existing eastern verge tree, which I believe was the Pride of Bolivia trees, is quite a young species. I can't recall the exact how old it is at the moment, but it has quite significant growth still to see, up to about 20 metres. I had the same question in regards to those existing trees within the lot and whether they would have the same issue of interfering. But ultimately, with those trees proposed in the lot as well, there would be a conflict of the canopy cover. So it's our Parks team's position that it would be best to leave that area vacant so that those eastern trees within the site could expand into that area of the verge as well as that easternmost verge tree.
Councillor Hallett, I think you had some questions.
I'm just happy for it to be in the briefing notes. I just wondered if admin can comment on the, I guess, assessment about sustainability, because I noted that the DRP, despite 4 times reviewing, was still of the opinion that it was still amber, and that we've moved nationally towards a net HERS of 7 stars, and they're proposing 6163. So I guess for me, meeting the bare minimum currently wouldn't be considered a sustainability tick. It would be greater than that. So just wondering if you comment on that to warrant the other deviations.
Certainly, sorry, through Mayor Cole. I can provide a little bit more information in the briefing notes. I do note that in terms of the sustainability principles, our ESD provisions are a due regard item only. So the provisions are not adopted by the WAPC at this stage, and they're still being considered. But I can provide some information in terms of what they are proposing in terms of sustainability measures as part of the development.
Councillors, Councillor Gonchevsky.
I don't have any questions, but just given the deviations in relation to visitor car parking, landscaping in terms of hard stand in the front setback, planting areas, balcony, upper floor, lot boundary setback, and outdoor living areas in dimension and cover, might be prudent to have some alternate words for refusal on the table. I'd be really grateful if I could get some assistance with preparing those. Thank you.
Councillor Alexander.
Just a couple of notes to consider. One of the concerns is the existing development to the west. That building has full floor to ceiling windows on that elevation, and the setbacks are 4 to 5 metres for the existing building. And then given that the western setbacks on the new development are reduced from the deemed to comply rule. So that is obviously an issue of privacy and scale. So maybe you could just tell us something about that next week, or have a look at that. But that does seem to be a fairly obvious issue. And also the streetscape elevation diagram is not to scale and doesn't show the proposed new building being 30% larger than the building to the right of it. The fourth query was the overshadowing diagram is not representative of the entirety of a day or the seasonality of the sun's passage. Shadowing of the western building will occur at a greater impact because the building is much closer to the boundary. The other one is the parking survey. Was actually done in 2018, and now it's got a busy childcare centre. My understanding that it was required to have at least two parking bays. So.
Yeah, we can include some information on all of those matters in the briefing notes.
The other suggestion, I don't know whether it's helpful or not, but the other suggestion was from people who are affected by it. They believe that the building being flipped to the other side of the property will increase the amenity of all the other properties concerned. So that's been asked as well, hasn't it? Okay. Yeah, okay. Okay. All right. Thanks very much.
Councillors. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to seek some clarification for a question asked in the gallery around the impact on overshadowing and visual privacy for the surrounding commercial properties and how that's different in this case, particularly in relation to the childcare.
Through you, Mayor Cole, so the way that our codes are set out is that the deemed to comply standards for visual privacy and overshadowing apply to residential properties only. So for that southern property that is zoned mixed use and is used for warehouse, and the childcare centre is to the eastern boundary. Therefore, those deemed to comply standards don't apply to the eastern and southern properties. However, through the working with the design review panel and through the amended plans, the applicant has sought to protect privacy to the childcare centre in particular through increasing the balcony setbacks and providing some landscaping to their eastern perimeter, and also providing a privacy screen to the eastern boundary of the Unit 6 balcony, just to protect the privacy to the main play space at the rear of the childcare centre. So while they didn't need to provide that, they've kind of tried to provide some design measures to reduce impacts of visual privacy. And then in terms of the shadowing, it's really through that separation of the driveway that they've provided, as well as the still being open to the northern aspect of the site, so they wouldn't provide worst case scenario shadowing to that eastern property.
Okay, thank you. So just to clarify then, that that's not a valid planning reason for refusal. If that on that basis alone, that would not be a valid reason. Yeah.
Could it not be considered though, I mean, as you say, it's been attempted to be addressed, but could it not be considered from a sort of sensitive use and amenity perspective? Because, you know, as the report talks about, there is the baby's play area and it talks about having a shade sail over it, and then there's a large external play at the rear. Is it possible to still get an idea of what, if any, overlooking, you know, what the view lines would actually be like from those balconies, given that they front the childcare centre, and also any feedback received from the childcare centre itself on, you know, any perceived or real impact to their amenity?
Yes, we can definitely provide some additional diagrams in the briefing notes.
And then the only other thing I was going to add through you, Mayor Cole, is that it is a valid reason for refusal. If I think that the challenge is there's no standards that apply, so we would need to make an argument that, or council would need to make an argument that the overlooking and overshadowing did, you know, was detrimental to the amenity of that property, to the point that the development didn't comply with the objectives of the residential zone, or sorry, of the zone, or of the you know, or of the R codes, for instance. So you just need to take it to a higher level, because there aren't specific standards that apply. We can provide information around that in the briefing notes, as well as in the alternative that we'll draft up.
And I think this has probably been covered along the way, but Teresa, who spoke tonight, did talk about a shadow diagram. She specifically requested to see a shadow diagram for her own property. So if that could also be provided, that would be useful. Any further questions? So just in terms of the view, what I'm looking at is the actual view from each level of balcony to the rear playground and to the babies area, and understanding what level of coverage that shade sail provides. Thank you. Okay. Moving on then, they're the items that were raised by members of the public gallery this evening. So we're now moving to 5.5 Robertson Park Development Plan. Any questions? Councillor Loden?
Just had a query around the costs there. We have just over $1 million in project fees and contingency, and I was just wanting to get some further information on what that consists of.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, absolutely. There is a percentage that is contingency, but a lot of those costs are probably more well known now that we've been going through the detailed design process and understand some of the external expertise that we'd be requiring due to the site, whether that is kind of surveying with electrical, water, things like that. So it's really about servicing and gathering all of the information that we will require in order to make sure that the project's feasible.
I know we've had workshops on this in the past, but my recollection was it wasn't quite this much, and I was just wondering if we could get some information on what it was previously, how much it's gone up by, I guess, and what's driving that increase in cost, and if there's an alternative option to reduce the scope rather than just increasing our expenditure on it in some ways.
Through you, Mayor Cole, absolutely. I guess the two main reasons for their increased cost is that costs of doing things like this have gone up since we did the development plan. So if we were to do the development plan and the level of detail that we did in September, yes, a year ago, it would be more anyway. And then the second reason is that we've done that detailed design now so that we have a much more true understanding of what the costs are. so that this is a more real reflection of what the real costs are rather than the estimate that we did because of the level of design that you see in the development plan. We've now gone through detailed design. We now have a landscape architect in the team that is able to do that for us versus previously when the plan wasn't done by our landscape architect. So that's the two reasons. In regards to the budget and your question around whether some elements could be removed, really in stage one, in order to have a viable tennis centre, none of those elements could be changed or moved. But those elements in stage two that you see funding for in those kind of outer years, they could definitely be either removed, but noting that that would require a change to the development plan itself, or they could be phased differently so that they were occurring in further outer years. I suppose given the fact that the community consultation and the work to the development plan reflecting the community sentiment, we'd recommend that if council were looking for a change, that would be in the year that it's delivered to be phased differently.
And for those stage one and stage two costs, what component of that is classified as asset renewal versus new?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the stage one is considered to be renewal of the existing tennis courts, and stage two, there are elements of renewal and new. The new elements are some of the elements regarding the leisure park, being that seating wall and the picnic settings, bench seats. But then you do also have elements of renew around the kind of more greening elements there. A new element would be community garden, but what we can do is in the briefing notes for stage two, note to you what are new and what is renew.
I guess, is there any inflation applied to the state contribution to it? As in, does the contribution increase at inflation, or does it stay flat?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I believe it stays the same.
I think Councillor Loden raised a very valid point about the project phase, which I think was sort of essence of your question. And it's a good one because in terms of design contingency, like I thought we were primarily relying on our landscape architect who's internal, and our project management framework does have some parameters around contingency. So I think when the overall cost is 5.4 million, and that's 1.01 or 1.1 million, it's probably could do with a little bit more information.
Yeah, to you, Mayor Cole, just to provide some more information, I suppose, on some of the detailed work that has been done and will have to be done. It's things like a site and feature survey, electrical engineer and landscape specification. All of those things would be done out of house. Also, given that it's a significant site, anything to do with the Section 18 requirements, we now have a much more understanding of what those requirements are and the work that will have to be done for that. So that's probably an overview of the external costs, and then the contingency as well has been built into that.
And the only thing I'd add, Mayor Cole, is that so this is all based on the quantity surveyor standards. So these are conservative numbers. There's no doubt about that, because that's what the quantity surveyor standards require us to be conservative in our project planning.
Yep.
So we are confident that the numbers will be less than this, but we wanted to give you numbers based on the standards that the landscape architects are applying.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Loden?
I guess I just wanted to confirm in the briefing notes there's going to be the details of what was the original numbers, and then I guess some further detail or breakdown on what the 1.1 will be spent on, and I guess maybe some commentary around what's changed, why has that changed, because we've had to add in these extra things, and maybe why they weren't included in the original estimate as well would be useful too.
I have a question about why 5.5 and 5.6 is separate. I thought they could have been dealt with together.
Chair Nicole, it's a really good question. We talked about this a lot. We wanted to, the city every year puts up a community sporting recreation facilities fund planning grant application. And we wanted to ensure that the process was the same each year. Sometimes this report has multiple funding applications, and it wasn't until quite recently that we were confident that this would actually be the only application we were doing. So it just gives us the ability to deal with them separately.
No problem. Just wanted to find out. So thank you. That's a good reason. Any further questions? Councillor Alexander?
I'm a little bit late to this project, but I presume that the council decided with community consultation that they required 18 courts, and then there's 4 which are multi-purpose. With 6 becoming clay, do the City of Vincent residents, and I presume, I think I know the answer to this, given that the 6 clay courts will be funded by tennis, they're going to be demanding preferential use and treatment. Then that brings the number of courts available to City of Vincent residents back to 12. Does that conflict with the agreement, I guess, you come to with the community?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's a really good question. The reason for the amount of courts was both based on community feedback, but also to ensure there was the right amount of courts for an operator to have a viable site here. So it wasn't just about the community, it was also about the operator ensuring that they had enough courts to play competitions and things like that. And the amount of courts that we ended up with being the 18 was the minimum amount of courts for that. You're right that yes, Tennis West would want preferential use of those 4 clay courts, but they would be available, yes, 6, sorry. But they would be available for the community outside of that training hours. And just also noting, I suppose this is actually really allowing us to achieve a lot of the comments that we did receive through community consultation. We went back and looked at the community consultation results that we received through the development plan, and there were comments requesting and wanting clay courts. The reason that we didn't include clay courts in the original development plan was the cost. The cost to implement and both maintain clay courts is very expensive, and that didn't at all wasn't going to be possible within our budget. But given that Tennis West is going to pay for the implementation and the maintenance, that gives us the ability to. So it's actually delivering a bit more on the community consultation that we did, and it works quite well with the fact that we are removing grass courts because clay is that softer surface.
Sorry, how many people were consulted?
There was 245 survey respondents in total, and 18 of those suggested clay courts.
That's a very small percentage. Through you, Mayor, I just suggest that, we're all representing ratepayers.
Is this a question, Councillor Alexander?
Yeah. So we're all representing ratepayers. I would imagine that with a consultation group of that size, and do you think we should go back and talk to these people about, apparently there was 36 courts there, now there's 18, and so a third of them will not be available to City of Vincent residents. Do you think that's okay?
Can I just help by saying that we have an abundance of tennis courts in the City of Vincent, which is part of our public open space strategy. So it might also be useful to have that kind of overview of our tennis facilities, and that one of our objectives of the public open space strategy was to rationalise those tennis courts because they are quite costly, particularly the grass courts, which Robertson Park had significant amounts of. So that's probably a factor to provide that sort of more like sort of holistic background as well. Over to you, Manager.
Through you, Michael, I was just going to say, just to clarify my point before, those survey respondents suggested clay courts without being asked. So we didn't ask people, do you want clay courts or do you not? And only 18 wanted them. That was just 18 additional comments without being asked about clay courts. We weren't asking about clay courts because of that ongoing maintenance cost and the high implementation cost. We do see that yeah, as I said, we went back to the community consultation and the comments that we received, and the comments regarding the type of court usage and the type of users would be very suitable for the clay courts, and the community consultation did not reflect, I suppose, a need for a certain amount of courts. The reason that we landed on the certain amount of courts that we did through the development plan was to make it a viable centre for the operator, and this still remains that viability for them.
Do you think you should go back and talk to the 200 plus people who we're considering how many courts they do need, which might be 18, and now there's a third of them being used by Tennis West?
Councillor Alexander, with respect, I think the manager just responded to that question.
Well, I don't agree. 18 out of 200 odd is very convenient. It's a really small group of people.
I think what the manager was pointing out is that this was people who mentioned clay courts as opposed to said, there wasn't a differentiation.
I understand exactly what
Okay.
you said.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can consult with the community again on this change. We're not recommending that. We think that the 6 clay courts won't have a significant impact on the community's usage. Given the feedback we got, our view was that it would be beneficial. There's no doubt that the Tennis West will want to see preferential access, and they're going to have preferential access. That doesn't mean the community can't use those courts, but they will be restricted in the hours they can use them. They'll be only able to use them in the evenings and during the day when the Tennis West development players aren't using them. And we think the evenings is probably the peak times the community will be using those courts. And so we didn't think it was going to have a significant impact. We have gone and spoken to the Friends of Robinson Park, and the Claysman. We've also contacted the Claysman Catchment Group and some of the neighbours around the park to let them know about this change. Friends of Robinson Park were very supportive of the change. We haven't gone and written to every single one of the survey respondents, though. If council wants us to do that, then we're more than happy to do that.
I think the question is, was it material to the community engagement? Having gone through that process, I don't think the type of court, other than the fact that the community were very supportive of removal of courts to create public open space, I don't think that it was material to the consultation about whether it would be hard stand or clay. So I think that has to be part of the consideration.
No, I was more talking about the availability of 18 rather than 12.
On that issue, I think because the plan has always been there will be a commercial operator, all of that question is pertinent to the use of all courts, because if there's a commercial operator that's running training programs, et cetera, that's always been a factor, that this wasn't going to be a resident only book a court situation. The idea was that there was always basically for it to be an affordable model where the City of Vincent can have someone maintaining the court, so that we're, saying the maintenance costs, etc., being handed over to a third party in the same way that, we are, where we would have had to pay for 6 courts to be resurfaced, we are now having the offer from Tennis West to fully pay for those courts, bringing down the cost of the total project, even though the costs are rising, but this is still hopefully levelling it out a bit. The idea was that this is effectively a financial gift from Tennis West, and the consideration of how that affected the overall budget. And the community were more interested in how many, public open space creation of multi-courts, having access, but I don't think that the issue of, we wanted to move away from grass because they are extremely high cost. But other than that, I don't think there was a differentiation between hard or clay, other than those who specifically requested it, because I understand that that's particularly good for seniors because it's softer on the knees.
And just through you, Mayor Cole, in relation to the commercial operator, that is the current management practice, and it's been the management practice of that facility for a very long time. So they've been a commercial centre for a long time. So there's none of that's proposed to change, other than creating that public open space where the grass courts are that aren't really used at the moment, those grass courts, because they're so expensive to maintain. The commercial operator hasn't been maintaining them he's not getting the usage out of them. So yeah, no changes proposed to the way it's operated, other than the number of courts will change, and there'll be courts that can be used much more, because they'll be maintained and renewed at a higher standard than they are at the moment, because some of them are unusable.
Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Opolo?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that there's been an amended budget included in the agenda. Is it possible, and this can be taken on notice, to just receive the incremental position that is of benefit to the City of Vincent? It's very clearly what incremental revenue that we would generate from supporting this item, and or the cost saving, because that's going to be borne by the by a third party. Is that possible to receive that?
Yeah, we can put some information together for the briefing notes.
Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions on the Robertson Park master plan, or development plan rather? Okay. Item 5.6, Community Sporting and Recreation Facilities Fund Forward Planning Grant Application. Any questions? Okay, I think we've probably already asked them. Thank you very much, Manager. We'll then move to Infrastructure Environment. We have no items this evening. So then on to Community and Business Services, 7.1, Financial Statements as at the 31st of July 2022. Any questions? Welcome, Manager Rees. I had one question. I was quite delighted to see public open space cash in lieu contribution from a subdivision. It's not something that we see very often, $112,000. I just was interested to know whether that will sit in the public open space reserve, and whether there are any requirements around where that money is spent.
Yes, through your Mayor Cole, that needs to sit in a reserve. The city cannot use it without the approval of the Minister for Planning. So it'll need to be spent on public open space in the vicinity. We'll need to get the approval of the Minister for Planning before we can then spend that money. But there shouldn't be any issue with that, as long as we're spending it on public open space in the locality.
So does that mean it can't commingle with our free public open space reserve, where we can spend it on any public open space in the city? We have to have a special cash in lieu reserve for this?
That's correct.
Okay, and could I find out a little bit of information about what the vicinity is that or what neighbourhood area it must be spent in?
Yes, I can provide that information in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Any other questions on the financial statements? Okay, item 7.2, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st to 31st of July 22. Any questions? Just a surprise to see that we had to pay to fix a leak to the indoor pool and the tiler had to come out. I thought perhaps that should be under warranty.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I do recall asking the same question, and I was given a really good response, but I can't recall it off the top of my head. So I would like to answer that in the briefing notes, but there was a good reason.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions on expenditure? Okay, 7.3, investment report, financial statements. Isn't it just normally called investment report? Yeah, it's got a bit of extra. Investment report as at the 31st of July 22. Any questions? 7.4, outcome of advertising and adoption of new communications and social media policy. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Just in 7.1, just wondering if the bullet 4 should be 2 bullets or if it's meant to be 1. I think major.
Yeah, I'll take that on notice. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, item 7.5, outcome of advertising and adoption of amendments to the recovery of debts, rates and service charges policy. Any questions? Okay. Item 7.6, adoption of the long-term financial plan for the period 2022-23 to 2031-32. Any questions on this item? Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Firstly, just a question on the low case scenario. It shows an asset sustainability rate average of 89%, which is obviously below the criteria of 90%, but only just. Is there a way that that could be amended to add a slightly more money into it so that it could actually meet that criteria? But, you know, and what would that require, like an extra 0.2% increase in rates at some point along that journey?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we would have to look into that a bit further. Ultimately, under that scenario, the 4-year capital works plan is clearly defined, but beyond that, there's some high-level assumptions made around whether it's renewal or new spend. So with all the 3 LTFP scenarios, that's what we've done. But we could potentially investigate that further if you like to see what it would take an additional spend. Between the low rate scenario and the base case, there's $6 million less capital work spend over the 10 years. So that's probably roughly the threshold you'd be looking at to get above those threshold targets.
So roughly, it was a little bit quiet. We couldn't quite hear you there, or at least I couldn't. It might be my old man ears. With me and my. So roughly, you would say about 6 million additional capex spend of the last 6 years of the LTFP to get from 89% to 90%.
Yeah, predominantly that's the main difference between the 2 scenarios. And in the base case scenario, we do hit the target. So that would be roughly the level required to meet the target.
I think maybe just following on from that then, in the mid-case scenario, though, we're also putting away, increasing our reserves as well. So I assume that it wouldn't be exactly the same as the mid-case scenario. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Through you, Mayor Cole, if you were to redirect those funds into capital spend as opposed to reserves, and that could also improve the ratios as well.
Councillors.
Sorry, now
sorry, keep going.
That's right. So now I got confused by that. So by allocating funds to reserves, that could still be used to meet our asset renewal targets because it's allocated into reserve for asset renewal.
Through you, Mayor Cole, sorry, I probably wasn't very clear with that. But yeah, so essentially what I was saying is if you don't build up the reserves over time and that additional $10 million in the base case or mid-case scenario was used purely on renewal, that would support a high asset sustainability ratio. So that's another difference between the 2 scenarios. We could do some high-level modelling to let you know what the incremental spend will be required in the low case to meet that target, if you like.
Thank you. My other query, and this probably would have been more useful when we started this process, but I do remember a conversation around NIB Stadium and how it is included or not in our LTFP scenario. And I can't remember where we landed on that, if NIB is part of it. And if so, what does that represent as part of the LTFP?
Through you, Mayor Cole, NIB Stadium was removed in FY21 from our accounts. So I think in FY20, the OIG asked us to include it. We put it in and then we took it out last year. So that's no longer in our assets and will not be reflected in the ratios either.
And would you be able to give us an idea of how much the grandstand contributes to the overall cost over the 10-year as well, please?
Through you, Mayor Cole, sorry.
That's the BD Park grandstand.
Okay, through you, Mayor Cole, the additional sort of BD Park works and leadable level works of $35 million are only modelled in the high level scenario. There are some other BD Park works as per the 4-year capital works plan that is currently included in all 3 scenarios, but the additional works are only in the high level scenario.
So I probably should be more specific. So assumably BD Park is part of our overall assets and the grandstand chunk of that as well. And so that contributes to how we work out our asset sustainability ratio. So based on that, because of having that grandstand, I was just interested to understand how much money we need to spend every year or over the 10 years to basically to provide sufficient funding to maintain that, to keep that asset sustainability ratio target.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can take that on notice and include something in the briefing notes.
Thank you. I recognise that's a bit of a curly one.
Councillors. Manager, I asked just offline by email about what's the, what sort of guidance is there around what level of reserves is a positive thing for a local government to have, and you provided me with some information, email response, just looking at Vincent compared to some of the other metro councils. I thought that was really valuable information, and I thought perhaps that would be a good addition to the report if you were happy to include that, because I think that's really, for me, one of the primary differences between the low and the moderate is there's obviously there's the $6 million on CapEx, which is quite critical too, but it's really then come the next critical factor is the building of the reserves, and I think that it's important for us to be able to justify, are we both increasing our renewal spend plus we're increasing reserves? Why do both, and how do we compare to other local governments? Question mark.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can include some of that information in the LTFP. We didn't want to add too much bulk to the existing report, but there's definitely some points in there around thresholds and how we've arrived at that benchmark, which we can include in the report as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking in the report rather than the long-term financial plan, but wherever you think it belongs, I think that would be very useful information. And I just would like to compliment you on the succinct nature of the report. After reading Shisha applications, it was stood out to me as being very clean and readable. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Other questions on the LTFP? Sorry. Oh, and also, yes, our first ever revenue and rating plan is tucked in there too. So yes, good to, thank you very much, Director. Councillor Opolo.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions. It actually wasn't clear to me whether the recommendation from administration is for us to adopt the base scenario, the low rate scenario, or the high rate scenario. Can you just clarify that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the recommendation is to adopt the base scenario, which is the mid-level scenario we discussed at the workshops.
Yeah, sorry, I was absent from that workshop. My next question is specifically related to the table on page 15. It's the table related to all assumptions for all scenarios. In that table, has organic growth in the population and dwellings, and therefore in the rate base across the city, been reflected in all scenarios? Because it's not mentioned here.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we've included a 0.5% interim growth in our modelling, which is over and above the rate increases you see there disclosed.
So the 0.5%, is that based on projections for the increased dwellings and density, and therefore the number of ratepayers? Is that what that represents?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, it's roughly a historical average. So there is an argument that it could be higher. However, with dwelling sizes sort of decreasing over time, that would potentially reduce GRVs and minimum rates. So there's an offsetting point there, which potentially more ratepayers come into a minimum rate. So 0.5% felt like a conservative but adequate estimate for us to put in the LTFP modelling.
Okay. In that same table, there's a statement that states the staff numbers FTE remain at the same level, and any increase in service expectations is absorbed through operational efficiencies. What's administration referring to there in terms of increased service expectations? Like what does increased service levels actually envisage? Like what do we envisage from that, and how do we measure it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, this statement is in there to just indicate that we've assumed that there's no additional FTEs, and we've just factored in sort of CPI and super increases on top of the existing salary budget in FY23. And if there were additional requirements required in the next 10 years, the assumption is they'd be absorbed with the current staffing levels. It's a very high level assumption. We haven't gone into too much detail about exactly what it could be, but just to give council comfort that we haven't budgeted any additional FTE over the life of the 10-year plan that you see.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Just to follow up on that, has administration actually considered that the operational efficiencies would actually facilitate the same service level and therefore a drop in FTE? So instead of saying, well, if we generate operational efficiencies, we'll just increase our service levels and hold FTE constant. I guess the scenario I want to know if administration has considered, and if so, why it was dismissed for the purpose of this item. Would we have not considered a potential cost saving to the city through reduction of FTE because of operational efficiencies, operating at the same service level, and therefore providing an opportunity to decrease rates for ratepayers in the city?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we didn't go into that level of detail. We did have a number of conversations around efficiencies and revenue and operating costs, which is in the budget. Where those could be clearly identified, we tried to sort of identify those in the LTFP, but the base case for the FY23 budget essentially is what the LTFP is built on, and it assumes that the FY23 budget is our base case, and we've made some high-level assumptions. So as you can imagine, when you're planning 10 years out, these estimates can be quite rubbery at times. So a detailed workforce or cost efficiency exercise to that extent wasn't conducted.
Okay. In the same table just below, it talks about potential revenue sources not included in the LTFP. I appreciate this is a high level 10-year plan, but there's some really material items in that table that we are excluding for the purposes of this. Why would we have not made an assumption on what we might look to achieve from the sale of car parks, from the additional revenue we're getting from parking that's already been made, and grant funding? These are really big material items. Why have we not made assumptions around those and included them in the LTFP?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the intention of that table is to highlight unknowns. So what we're saying is there is potential upside in some of these areas in the future. We're not able to quantify that upside at this point in time, but notwithstanding, there could be additional grant revenue. There could be further parking and law changes or increases in parking in the future over and above what we know at this point in time. So there would be very high level assumptions. We've been more conservative with our modelling as opposed to being overly aggressive with ambitious revenue targets that may or not be achievable in the future.
Just to add to that, just to add to Councillor Apollo, that list also involves essentially decisions which administration couldn't make assumptions on because they would be future council decisions. So we couldn't assume the outcome of a future council decision around some of those items. Around the issue around FTE, just to expand more on that, we've got two major non-rate revenue sources, which is BD Park and car parking revenue. And in order to grow the revenue, that we may need to put on additional casual staff or contract staff to provide extra services. We'd only be doing that if we were able to assume that they'd be self-funding or revenue positive minus the additional labour costs. But that would be clear when those decisions are made.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the point with my question, the question is that everything going forward is crystal balling. Like we don't have any certainty on anything, but we still do a 10-year plan, and because these are material items, I would have liked some additional information on those and how it would actually affect what you're proposing, because I guess this goes to my next point. What are we actually approving here? I mean, the recommendation from administration is that we're adopting this long-term financial plan as is. And so I guess my concern is, even though it's a 10-year plan, what am I actually agreeing to here when I'm concerned that there's some material items not included?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'd probably just describe this as essentially a point in time, and it's the point in time we've got to now, based on some of the bigger changes that have been made to the external environment and our internal operations since Council last adopted the LTFP or provided an update to the LTFP, which was specifically the scenario around ending the commercial waste service. If any of those bigger changes or another council decision in the future materially changed our 10-year outlook, then that would probably prompt our next update to the LTFP. If there was a major change to asset sales that made a significant change to our reserves or our rating scenarios, that would prompt within the next year or the next 2 years, the next update to the LTFP. So it's really just a snapshot in time, and it's helping to inform the annual budget process, which will be commencing only in a couple of months' time as well.
Okay, so thanks, David. That's a good point of clarification. I appreciate that. So I just to paraphrase what I think you're saying, and the question I'm asking administration is a yes or a no to this. So what we're saying is this is just a very high level view. It's a guiding. It's not so much informing in the sense that it's a guide, but if council was to approve the recommendation to adopt it, that we're not locked into it because any of those material items would significantly impact the rates that we're proposing for ratepayers going forward, and that it's not like we're going to be locked into this. We will then pivot as required as this new information comes to hand and go into more detail in the annual budget process.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's exactly right. I'd describe this document as having two sort of key purposes. It's not actionable. A budget decision is only actionable by council resolution on adopting the annual budget, which is on a year-by-year basis. As of now, this draft it's a well-informed, good basis for next year's annual budget, which is year 2 in the LTFP. And what the LTFP demonstrates to the community and to the department is that we have an achievable pathway to financial sustainability over this 10-year horizon. So it gives us a very good launching pad for the discussions around next year's annual budget with quite accurate forecasts on capital expenditure, operating expenditure, and some rating scenarios. And in making those decisions, it shows that pathway that will remain financially sustainable over the course of this plan.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Ruth. I don't have anything else at this stage.
Thank you very much, Councillor Apollo. Any further questions on the long-term financial plan, Councillor Alexander?
Thanks, Mayor. With the high rate scenario, it talks about providing funding for additional large-scale projects, including Betty Park and Leederville Oval. Do you think it's appropriate that ratepayers are paying for Leederville Oval and Betty Park, given many people would suggest that Betty Park is a state level facility which was left to the City of Vincent after the breakup of City of Perth, who built it? And also with Leederville Oval, the WA Football Commission and the AFL promised that it would be the second oval, which is nice to see the grand final there. But why are we increasing rates for ratepayers to pay for that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the high rating scenario is not the one we're proposing or recommending. And those 2 points, particularly given the large scale capital expenditure required for those 2 sites, we certainly agree that both facilities have either regional or state significance. I think we could make an argument that Betty Park has national heritage significance because it's the last remaining piece of Commonwealth Games sporting infrastructure left in WA from 1962. So we think there should be some federal government interest in preserving the history and heritage around that site. And it's certainly of interest to the AFL, having a high quality functioning second tier ground like Leederville Oval this close to the CBD. So I think we should be exploring both federal and state funding opportunities. We wouldn't be suggesting that any of those projects be 100% funded by the ratepayers of the City of Vincent. So they're two of our highest priorities on our advocacy agenda, which we raise on a regular basis with state and federal contacts.
I note in the comment under, well, firstly, the high rate scenario, it says high rates have increased from 23-24 to 26-27, 6 to 7%. Does that include or does not include 2.1 for underground power?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we have included underground power in both year 2 and 3 of the LTFP 10-year plan. But just to reiterate David's point, it's just a scenario analysis. So it's just to provide council a different view on what could be done and what would be required from a rate rise perspective to fund those projects.
And under the comment section, you got the long-term financial plan has been modelled primarily based on the 22-23 budget. Does that mean the budget has been, or the long-term financial plan has, if you're following the 22-23 budget, there was a rate increase of 7.6%. So what does that mean for you using the 22-23 budget as a model?
Through Mayor Cole, that means year 1 of this plan is our current financial year's budget. So where year 1's already agreed, where we only start to then work around what year 2 is under this plan.
Sorry, I don't fully understand that, because this is a 10-year plan and you're saying it's been modelled on the 22-23. Now you're saying that's only referencing year 22-23.
No, through Mayor Cole, I should note, you're correct. It's actually only a 9-year plan because year 1's already been agreed and we're working to that in this financial year, give or take any decisions council makes at the mid-year budget review. So the annual budget that was adopted by council several months ago is the first year of 10 years of spending and revenue over that 10-year plan. So we're only talking about changes or forecasts starting from year 2.
Okay.
Councillor Alexander, are you still asking questions?
I was, and then I lost my train of thought. Sorry. All right, I might just have to leave it there. The other thing I did want to ask, though, sorry, I remember what it was now. In your notes, you mentioned that should there be windfall profits, like the sale of land and those sorts of things, that you would then advise council. Do you think it would be advantageous to a scenario plan like a long-term financial plan is, advantageous to have, picking up things like the land sale, parking, grant funding and those sorts of things? Do you think it would be advantageous for a scenario to include major pieces of potential revenue like that?
Through Mayor Cole, it would be advantageous to the financial position. Essentially, if in council adopting that, it was adopting a pro stance across those potential areas to specifically and actively seek extra revenue around land sales or parking or other potential areas. It would be very hard for us to speculate what that number could or should be. But we'd be supportive of it being a higher number if that meant council was then essentially giving us a mandate to look at all other potential opportunities to explore land sales or potential parking revenue outcomes.
All right, okay, thanks very much. One final question. You said the scenario 3, the high rate scenario, is not the one you'd be following. Which one is it?
Through Mayor Cole, that's the one we describe as the base case. It's called the base case, but it's actually the medium range scenario. So the one that is described as base case in that document, scenario 1.
Okay.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think we can make the recommendation a bit clearer as to which scenario is being adopted based on the feedback.
Yeah, I think so, given that 2 council members have raised it. Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alexander. Are there any other questions on the long-term financial plan and rating and revenue strategy? All right, thanks very much. We then move to 8.1. Sorry, no, we've done that. We move to 8.2, information bulletin. Any questions? Councillor Loden.
So I don't think we've done 8.1. That was the CB.
Oh,
the CBP.
Sorry, they're both such big chunky items. I just jumped over it, didn't I? I sort of consider them in the same box. Apologies. 8.1, adoption of the corporate business plan 2022-23 to 2025-26 and 4-year capital works program 2022 to 23, 25 to 26. Is it worth also mentioning in the title that the CEO's KPIs are in there? Because I think that's probably quite good too to mention. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. So my question is something about specifically in the CBP, which is why I didn't ask it in the LTFP one. Under our strategic projects, we've got listed the Beatty Park Leisure Centre repair and maintain heritage grandstand as a key item, which has funds in 2022/23 and 23/24. And I just wanted to understand where we're at in terms of our decision making around that. I'm on the Beatty Park working group, but I don't believe that has come back to council as yet for decision making around that. And given that, I'm just wondering on the status of these items in there prior to council considering a forward direction on Beatty Park.
Through Mayor Cole, just to clarify, that's item 3.1, which lists 715,000 and 200,000 for repair to the grandstand. So works are currently underway based on the council adoption of the tender to do some of the water egress works. These numbers are essentially those estimates of what those works could be over the course of that project plus the electrical works. I think it's the combination of those two things which have been discussed in some detail. It's not about the refurbishment project or preservation of that. Yeah.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, it's not, we're not budgeting for any aspirational projects. These reflect existing capital works projects that are in train and at various stages of either design and delivery according to what council have signed off.
I didn't think it was that much though. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to follow up to that, if that's the case, could we consider a change of wording? Because the way it reads, it certainly refers to the heritage grandstand and maintaining it, and particularly the description of developing a long-term approach to preserve and protect the history and heritage of the 1962 grandstand. So perhaps that could just be a bit clearer in the description. And other major elements, yeah, that could be all sorts of things.
Yeah. Through Mayor Cole, we can definitely tighten. I think that we've had a historic terminology that we've been using. So I think it's a bit of a hangover from that, but we can tighten that up a bit.
Councillors, corporate business plan, Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just on the community engagement column in the 4-year capital works program, it's empty for a lot of the entries. And I guess if we're going to have it, we should fill it. So could we please have that information added? Or if it's going to be removed, sufficient information in the report for, I guess, council to determine that community engagement will occur as per our community engagement policy. And then just on, I guess, reporting, because there's still ticks in 4 years when, and anyway, so I guess where we have.
There is an explanation of the tick.
I know.
I'm just pointing it out.
I know that there's explanations for ticks, but I guess my issue is that for certain items within the plan, there is one line in the table that is develop a plan and implement the plan. And so there's ticks over 4 years. However, from the perspective of understanding what the organisation is going to deliver in terms of plans versus implementation, it would be useful to be able to understand what level of reporting we're going to get against some of these things, because I do note from reviewing previous capital works programs, there is a question, that sometimes these sort of planning activities, they seem to hang around. And I guess it doesn't allow us, if there's important plans that are going to then potentially hold up other things, if the plans aren't done, would be really useful for council to be able to have some understanding of those and call accountability to them. So could I please just to get an understanding of what reporting we're going to get in relation, not just to the capital works program, which is incredibly important, but also the other organisational outputs that are featured in the corporate business plan.
Yep, through Mayor Cole.
I was just thinking there's a lot of preamble happening with questions this evening.
I think
It's maybe because I've asked this question multiple times over multiple years. So one day I'm going to get the answer I want.
No, it's just a general vibe tonight.
Through Mayor Cole, could I just clarify with Councillor Gonaszewski, are they mainly the strategic planning projects in the policy in place item? Through
you, Mayor Cole, to the CEO, I think my question really relates to in the organisational sort of output section of the corporate business plan rather than the capital works program. How will we get reporting on the administration's implementation of those pieces of work?
Through Mayor Cole, if they were, depending on the number of items, if you could just identify which ones they are, and we could agree what level of reporting they would be, whether they were coming through as updates to council, if it's not a strategic project, through separate reporting on progress against the corporate business plan. Obviously, there's the annual report, but that's only once a year. But if it was anything that required a council decision, that would usually be done through a workshopping process or through the information bulletin.
Okay, so I guess, so from what I'm hearing from you, that the council will receive reporting on the implementation of strategic projects and the implementation of the capital works program, and then an annual report on the delivery against the CBP. And then if there's specific projects within the CBP that council wishes to receive additional information on, or I guess a calendar as to when those projects might be expected to be completed over the 4 years, like if it's not clear which year that might finish in, we would request that and get that information. All right, okay, thank you.
Councillors, CBP questions? Councillor Opolo.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one question regarding the 4-year capital works program. Is it possible, and this can be taken on notice, to receive a list of the works by project, the anticipated spend in each financial year to be financed from municipal rates, i.e. the net amount excluding grants and reserves, and the existing commitments by year?
Through Mayor Cole, I didn't get in all of that through the audio. Could the councillor please repeat that?
Regarding the 4-year capital works program, is it possible to receive a list of works by project, the anticipated spend in each financial year to be financed from municipal rates, i.e. the net amount excluding grants and reserves, and the existing commitments by year?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can provide that information. There won't be any, I suppose, existing commitments beyond FY23. But the other years, we definitely have a breakdown between grants, contributions, community reserves that we could provide. So that's no problem at all.
Thank you.
Councillors, anything further? Okay, then item 8.2, information bulletin. Councillor Loden.
Just a quick one on development applications. We've talked previously around the processing times, and I'm curious, is there going to be a point where we think we'll end up having some way of reporting it as a, so will we eventually get to a point where we get everything under 90 days with this sort of, including some kind of proof? There has been conversations around a stop the clock component being added into this. Is that still in train?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the stop the clock is included in there. Yeah, so yes, that's the aim, to get below 90 days for all application, or for all applications to be within the statutory timeframe. That is absolutely the goal. At the moment, we're aiming for 85%. So we're starting with that goal first. Once we've achieved that, my plan is to aim for 90%, 95% or more. Yeah.
Councillors, anything further on the info bulletin? Okay, thank you. We do have one remaining item this evening. It was listed as a confidential item, but it has been released publicly, but it's still under 11.1. Councillor Apollo, we may have to bid you farewell at this point.
Mayor, just because it's the last agenda item, would it okay for me or appropriate for me just to sign off, or would you like to call me back when the discussion's completed?
Well, look, it's a briefing, not a council meeting, so we won't be reading out a decision of council. So you are more than entitled to say good night, and appreciate you attending when you're not feeling particularly well.
Thank you. And just to confirm, there's nothing else after this?
Correct? No, that's it. We won't be discussing anything further after this.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, so 11.1, claim for reimbursement legal costs. Council members, any questions? Look, I probably will just ask questions that I asked when this item was confidential, just for the public record. So it really pertained to the issue of whether the issue in which Councillor Iopolo was seeking to have his legal expenses paid fell under the policy, in that it was in relation to the performance of functions as a council member. I just wanted to share with you all, which I did email around to you, that I sought advice from Welga on that, just to get additional advice, and received some very clear advice from Tony Brown at Welga. And I think that the question that I have is, could that advice please be provided in the report, because I think it does add additional depth and clarity. And Tony Brown of Welga indicated that he was more than happy for that to be included in any documentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I noticed that advice, and we'll include that into the report.
Thank you. So for those who perhaps haven't had a chance to read it, I just recommend that you do read that advice, because it sort of goes to that issue of performance of the role of a council member, which for me was the key issue, given that this was a WA Electoral Commission matter. And the other question I had is that, again, one of the reasons that council deferred it, there were two reasons. It was for the report to be made public, and that was with the consent of Councillor Oplow. And the second reason was for the application to be made in the manner specified in the policy, so that all governance requirements were met. Can I just clarify, is Councillor Iopolo's statutory declaration the stat dec, but also the application?
Through you, Matt. Yes, the stat dec is essentially fulfilling multiple roles, including the application and the declarations that needed to be made under the policy.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, are there any other questions? Okay, thanks very much. All right, well, if there's no further questions, that concludes our business for this evening. So thank you all very much Thank you to staff. Also just would like to, I should have done this at the beginning of the meeting and I will formally do it at the council meeting. I also just wanted to welcome Jocelyn Colley to the role of acting governance manager, executive governance manager of governance. So we'll formally do that at the meeting, but great to see you in the role. And thank you, Acting Director of Infrastructure and Environment, for continuing on in that role. So I'll close the meeting at 8:11 p.m. and wish you good night.